welcome everybody. My name is Tom Finkelpearl. I am the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs and also the co-chair of this commission on art, monuments, and markers. And I have with me here today several of our commissioners. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. This is the first of 5 public hearings that we're going to have, one in each borough, and we're really happy to see everybody here today. So if the other commissioners who are here with us today could simply introduce ourselves, starting with Gonzalo.
Gonzalo Casals, Leslie Loma Museum and Roosevelt Institute and Hunter College.
John Calvelli, the Wildlife Conservation Society and Chair of the Cultural Institutions Group.
Justin Moore, Executive Director of the New York City Public Design Commission.
I'm Richard Alba. I'm on the faculty of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York.
Great, thank you so much. So I have a brief presentation. I want to give a little bit of background about the commission, what we've been doing, how we're thinking about things, the charge of the commission, and then we're really here to listen to you. Today, we're going to have people sit over here and give their testimony. Everything is being transcribed, as you can see, so just want to say that out loud. There will be a transcript of this public meeting. So we are the Commission on Monuments and Markers. We have been charged by the mayor to come up with general policies. But I want to say first, and I think people in Queens understand this quite clearly. If you see the picture up here, that's a picture of a sculpture called Civic Virtue. It was put in front of City Hall in 1922. Queens people will remember that it got put in front of, right next to Borough Hall for years. It's been now moved to Greenwood Cemetery. But I just want to say that the idea that there are controversies around public art or people are worried about public art is not a new thing. It's been going on in New York City for a very long time. In the country, we obviously understand that this is a moment in which people are thinking about monuments. Obviously, we see in the slide there on the left is the monument to Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville, which created the protests at which somebody was eventually killed. On the right, you see a monument in Philadelphia to Mayor Rizzo, which has become quite controversial. There's a big controversy around that. It's right in front of City Hall, and there's questions about whether that mayor represents the values of Philadelphia. I'm not weighing in on any of these, simply saying that their controversies are happening all over America, and that is why we have this commission. Next slide, please. So the mayor formed this commission. We have 16 members, I believe. They're from a whole variety of points of view, a variety of professions. I will say also, all the people you see up here are men. There are plenty of women on this commission as well. But the Mayor Advisory Commission on Monuments, Markers, Art, Monuments, and Markers will advise the mayor on issues surrounding public art and historic monuments and markers on city-owned property. By the end of the year, the commission will propose non-binding guidelines to advise how the city should address monuments seen as inconsistent with the values of New York City. Next slide, please. So when we say monuments and markers, just to be clear, on the left you see a monument, that's Joan of Arc Monument, and on the right you see a marker, that's a park in Queens. It was named after a popular educator. So these are the kinds of objects that we are considering. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to also put this in the context of an existing process. So what we're talking about now is step one is commission's going to make recommendations. That will be handed over and will be made into mayoral policy. So the commission will make recommendations. This is an incredible group of smart people. They're going to come up with great ideas, but that's non-binding. It's going to be made into policy. And then it's very important to note, and Justin, who is sitting here on my left, is the head of the Public Design Commission, and there's a charter-mandated procedure which will remain in place. And that procedure includes that agency making a recommendation. So let's say something's on Park Department property. The Parks Department would make a recommendation. It would then go to a community board hearing and go to the Public Design Commission. Public Design Commission was founded in the 19th century, and that is the final say on things that are on city property. So I just want to make that very clear. We are not alone in this. There are jurisdictions all over America that have formed commissions quite like this, and here's just a map of some of those. We've been on the phone with some of these folks. We've been talking to people in different cities, looking at the findings from those other cities. So it is something, it's a national discussion, and we have been discussing this and looking at models from other cities. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the discussions that have been going on in our commission. And there are certain words that keep coming up and ideas that keep coming up, and those include historical accuracy, that it's important to understand the history of a particular site, a particular person. It's a very big moment for historians. Participation, we're here in public. There's a participatory process that is part of this, that should remain part of this. There's this whole question of power, like who has the power to put up a monument, and what does that mean? Complexity is important. The commission keeps saying it's important not to take away the complexity of the history of the city. There's the word inclusive keeps coming up. We want to make sure that we have inclusive public spaces in New York City. And finally, there's this possibility for the future, which has to do with not simply subtracting, but adding. So what could we do to add to the fabric of New York City? Possibility of new commissions, et cetera. So here are some guiding principles that are, again, this is still under discussion. These are things that came up at all of our commission meetings. And again, these are some of the same words that we just talked about, which has to do with inclusion, historical understanding, complexity, and reckoning with power. So these are some of the values. So the idea is first the commission sort of establishes some values and then some procedures. So we also just wanted to say that when you think about adding to the fabric of New York City, mostly people are thinking about, let's say, the center of the top. This is a added monument. It's Harriet Tubman up in Harlem, and that is fine, and that's interesting, and that's absolutely something we've been doing over the last decades. But there's also temporary artistic interventions. For example, on the top left, an artist named Edgar Heap of Birds is one of his projects is to let people know what nation's land you're on at any particular moment. On the far right at the top is an ongoing project by an artist who's in the sanitation department, artist in residence, and she has been doing works that relate to sanitation workers and parades, and so there are other kinds of traditions that might be more like a performance, like a temporary work. There are also different kinds of institutions, like a new institution. If you think of the Center for Jewish History down in Battery Park, that is a monument to memory of the Holocaust. There's educational, there's public dialogue. So I just wanted to put on the table, and this is stuff that's been discussed quite a bit at the commission meetings, the idea that there are lots of different things aside from simply people sitting on pedestals. Next slide, please. So we are really here to listen to you. We'll try to keep our comments at the beginning short. We want to emphasize that it's a hearing format. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to give testimony. People are going to sit over here. I will call out the names, and we're going to seat people 3 at a time. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. Robert Holden?
Yeah, Councilman-elect.
Oh, okay, Councilman-elect. So tradition has it that elected officials or future elected officials get to jump the line, and we're going to start with Mr. Holden. Okay, so if you would like to make a statement. Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning.
And then we'll bring our first panel up here in a second.
Thanks for holding this hearing. I do think that we have to proceed cautiously. This country made mistakes, obviously. Our history is full of them, and full of mistakes, and we shouldn't judge our art or monuments on today only. So it's the history that's very, very important. And those mistakes are there, obviously, and we have to consider that in any kind of monuments. But if there's some that are so egregious, yes, I agree, some that are insulting to the population, yes, they should be removed. But let's not destroy our past to be politically correct now. And let's look at and weigh it. And I know the task you have at hand is daunting, but at this point, let's not change who we are. And we do have a past that, yes, it's controversial, some statues and obviously Civil War figures, but we really have to think about this. And I know you guys will deliberate and certainly come back with recommendations. And I just hope the mayor actually listens and to the people, because and that's why we're here today, to hear the people. But there's more than more testimony that has to come from other areas. And at this point, I respect you have again some issues to deal with, and I would just say, let's not lose our history, good or bad. Thank you.
Okay, and I think we're going to then seat our first panel. Thank you very much. This is, if I could have John Hatfield, Jacob Morris, and Shawnee Rice. Each of you will get your chance to speak for 3 minutes. If I may say, while they're being seated, there's also an online opportunity for you to weigh in. We've already gotten actually a couple of thousand people, New Yorkers and others have given their opinion. We have, 4 more of these hearings in other boroughs. So if you know folks that couldn't make it here, even if you're from Queens, you can go to the one in Brooklyn. This is the schedule, which is available online. And then also, do we have the final slide that tells you how to, okay, we'll put that slide up in a minute. Okay, there's Nadia. Okay. nyc.gov/Monuments Commission, if you see that address right there, it gives you the time and place of each of these subsequent hearings and also gives you the opportunity to fill out an online form. With that, I'm sorry to deviate. Could we start with John Hatfield?
Hello? Hello? Am I on? Okay. I'll be reading my testimony this morning. My name is John Hatfield, and I am the Executive Director of Socrates Sculpture Park here in Queens. And I'm grateful to be able to offer my testimony this morning. I want to start by applauding the efforts of Mayor de Blasio, Commissioner Finkelpearl, Darren Walker, and this commission for taking up such a complicated task. Having also worked at the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation during the process and selection of the 9/11 Memorial, I have experienced what it means to grapple with opposing perspectives on the social, cultural, political, and historical role monuments, memorials, and sculptures play in the collective expression of our values as a society. Socrates Sculpture Park has produced and presented over 1,200 temporary public artworks for over 30 years, and in that time we have faced our own controversies. There are also 3 sculptures in the park by the artist John Ahern, which were originally a public art commission for the Bronx, but were removed following a short contentious battle. For almost 25 years, the sculptures have been at Socrates and provided a point of departure for dialogue that we have explored in our educational programming. Based on these experiences, I come here this morning to humbly offer a few thoughts to consider in your deliberations. First, there is no such thing as a permanent monument. Nothing created by human beings is in perpetuity. Throughout history, individuals, governments, communities have made decisions to create, destroy, or preserve monuments, memorials, or public sculptures. It's always an active effort, whether it is the pyramids of Giza, Buddhas of Afghanistan, Confederate or Stalinist monuments, or the Statue of Liberty. Creating, maintaining, preserving, or removing is an effort and a choice. Secondly, given that it is an active choice, let's not shy away from the conversation and be open to the differences of opinion on these matters. Part of the effort of artworks created for the public realm is the ongoing dialogue it creates through conversations, resource allocation, and decisions. I hope our current conversations and your policy recommendations will be guided through the lens of the cultural and historical values of our city, not by either elitist view or by populist opinion, and not by the heat of the moment or by political expediency. Elected officials have made the right decision to empower a commission to make thoughtful recommendations that will have an impact beyond this generation into the next. Just as I experienced with the 9/11 memorial jury, I am heartened to see the breadth and scope of expertise for the task. I ask you to please take your time. The issues which are raised through these conversations and debates are not easily resolved, and be mindful that it takes exponentially more time to create than it does to remove or to destroy. It's my hope, and a more difficult task, that the Commission will make a nuanced policy recommendation where every monument under consideration might be given the opportunity to be assessed thoughtfully and thoroughly in the specific context. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. And so just, we do have a buzzer here, but we're going to be a little bit flexible if you're trying to wrap it up, but don't go on for an hour. But if you have a couple of seconds extra. So I think we're going to go then to Jacob Morris and then to Shani Rice.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'm on.
Yes.
Jacob Morris, I'm the director of the Harlem Historical Society.
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic? It's hard to.
I'm the director of the Harlem Historical Society and the New York City Freedom Trail. So I'm going to say I feel like the parameters of the commission are flawed in a fairly fundamental way. So two of the most egregious instances here in New York City are the Tweed Courthouse, named after Boss Tweed, the most corrupt elected official in our city's history. Is not the Tweed Courthouse a form of a monument? And it's the headquarters of our public school system? This is egregious. This guy is so I guess what I'm trying to say is ultimately what this commission has to come up with is, where is the line? Where's the line in history? And when does it become so egregious that you got to get rid of this person's name or their likeness or their symbolism because they're just way over the line? So, you know, we're not going to have any statues of Hitler. We're not going to have any statues of Stalin. And, you know, Boss Tweed, we got to take his name off that courthouse. And maybe this esteemed commission will recommend that, because I see that in your parameters, it's possible you could enlarge your purview to include something like the Tweed Courthouse being named after somebody that's worthy, not like a Boss Tweed who's super corrupt. And this is what our children learn in school. And then there's Rikers Island, sold to New York City to be the headquarters, the largest penal institution in North America, a symbol and a reality of injustice. We all know this. And who was Richard Riker? This guy was the center of a web of kidnapping, among which was black children, thoroughly documented by National Book Award and Pulitzer Prize winning historians. I believe it was like in 1836. These bounty hunters went into a classroom in the African free schools, and they pulled an 8-year-old black boy out of the classroom and brought him before Richard Riker's court to sell into slavery, because under the Fugitive Slave Act, he got kickbacks from every bounty hunting ring in New York City. If he wasn't the chief magistrate and perverting our system of justice, so take his name off Rikers Island. And by the way, in the lead up to this, I saw the picture of Harriet Tubman. I personally got over 2,000 signatures from residents of Harlem that want her facing north towards freedom, not south towards slavery. And this was when they put the statue up. That was expediency. Expediency is something else that the members of the commission need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shawnee Rice.
Hello. I'm going to be speaking from my perspective as a young woman with Indigenous descent. I'm here because I want to have a critical lens of what the statues mean in New York City. I think the statues should reflect what the city reflects. And in New York City prides itself on being inclusive and diverse in the United States, but also in the world. Ooh.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's not 3 minutes.
I think that a lot of the statues right now do not reflect that. I think a lot of the statues, specifically talking about statues and monuments in high traffic areas, are a lot of older white men. I think for Indigenous people, people of color, especially young folks, it's problematic when we have to look up and see white men on these pedestals and we can't see any statues that look like us. I think Harriet Tubman is placed in Harlem for a reason, but that's not the main points of traffic in New York City. It's problematic for young Indigenous women, young folks of color, to look up and not see anybody that reflects them. What does that mean for my identity? What does that mean for my ability to navigate New York City? What's my role in having a voice in politics? What's my role in being validated among the narrative in the city? So I think we need to be really critical about what these statues reflect. I think an original reason that some statues went up don't matter today. I think when the Columbus statues went up, it was to create some sense of unity among American folks because he, quote, discovered what is now America's. But now that we have all of the information released about what is in his diary, is that what we really want to have on the pedestal in the middle of Columbus Circle? And this is not an attack at all on Italians. I think Italian culture is beautiful, and they've done so much work and advancement in labor rights. There's a lot of other folks that we could consider, Italian folks that we could consider replacing this statue. But I think first, what we need to concentrate on is the critiquing of the current statues. Why are they up, and what do they mean? And then once we have a bigger conversation around with educational context, historical context, then we can talk about what's the exit strategy for removing it, and the best way for New Yorkers and our tax money, and what would be replacing it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to ask people to refrain from applause. We usually, at the hearing format, we do something like that, which is another inclusive way to do it. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the first panel. The next panel is Rich Charola, Jonathan Kranz, and Jeffrey Kressler. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I misspelled. I'm sorry. Yes. Rick, you're the right person. Yes, you are. Okay. Okay. So we're going to start with Rick Chavola. I'm sorry to misread your name. And go ahead.
Hauka, Nemiyuta Menue, Rick Chavoya Kumiyai.
You have to, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You have to press the button so the red light is on. Go ahead.
Hauka, Nemiyuta Menue, Rick Chavoya Kumiyai. This is kind of probably messing up the prompter, but I just introduced myself in the Kumeyaay language, which is my culture. I'm Rick Chavoya. Greetings and thank you for having me, and thank you to the Commission and to Mayor de Blasio for having this proceedings. And I am the board chair of the American Indian Community House, which serves Native people here in New York City and the surrounding area. There are, in fact, by last census, 110,000 Native people here in New York City. Oftentimes people know that we exist anymore, but we in fact do, and we live here in New York City, and we're from tribal nations all over the world, actually. So I'm very honored to be here. I also take a moment to thank and give blessings to the Lenape people. Lenape were the original people of this land, and this is their ancestral homeland, so we thank them for allowing us to be on their land. I want to bring forth a couple of ideas, and the first is that history is always changing, and that's part of what's amazing about New York City is that it changes with history. And it's been already pointed out that this is just a fact of life, and there are symbols and edifices that have been come and gone all throughout our history. But one that remains, that stands strong, and that we still believe in is the Statue of Liberty. When people look out there, they believe in what it represents. Democracy, the right of people to come here for freedom, the right of people to have homes and to have the sanctity of their home not taken from them, and to be able to progress in ways that make their life better. And that symbol went up, the Statue of Liberty went up, because there were a lot of people who didn't believe some people belonged here in the United States. And I'll say specifically, there were a lot of people, and you can look at the chronicles of the New York Times, that venerable newspaper that records the fact that there were public figures and a lot of powerful people who were saying that many people didn't belong in New York City, not the least of which were people from Southern Europe, right? And so in order to combat that way of thinking, a symbol went up that said, no, you are in fact welcome here. We are a democracy. We do believe in what in your right to live well and to have a home and to do good things for others. And that's what's happened since then. There's other statues that don't symbolize that, and that's the statue of Columbus and the statues around the city of Columbus. And what they do is they glorify a figure who was against all the things that the Statue of Liberty represents. Christopher Columbus, by his own diaries, by his own admission, looked at the generous people of the Americas, the Native people. Instead of feeling good about them and welcoming them, instead what he did is he enslaved them, he dispossessed them, he took their land, he raped the women. If people didn't give him enough tribute in gold, he chopped their hands off. He was responsible for all kinds of atrocities. These are not imperfections. These are the core part of who he was. And they represent everything we do not want to be as people of New York City or people of this world. And so these symbols to people like this cannot remain. They need to be taken down because they're not just a small example of an imperfection. They're the core part of what this person believed and came and brought that to this country. And we cannot allow that to be a symbol and to glorify that as New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Krantz?
All right. All right.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Just to be more inclusive, I'm speaking really for myself. I think we should take a look at the Shakespeare statue in Central Park, considering The Merchant of Venice and Othello. His opinions at that time when he wrote might be objectionable to some. I know it's Port Authority, but certainly we could look at some bridges and airports, which are named for people who, although fairly recent in our lives, have reputations that are now being called into question. We have schools with names on them. Perhaps there are people who object to the Norman Thomas High School for his points of view, and maybe there should be a mayoral committee to consider the names of people on schools and whether they are deservedly so, similar to what the gentleman said before about the Tweed Courthouse. We attach names, but not as monuments, but we attach them to buildings because we want to honor somebody, and perhaps we should look back at some of their behavior. Two other institutions that are based on the fabulous wealth of very unpleasant men. One is the Ford Foundation, and one only needs to read Henry Ford's writings and understand that he was not the nicest or most loyal man toward anybody other than himself. He used thugs to attack his labor, and yet we honor the Ford Foundation. The chairman is not here, but he has his basis in the wealth of Henry Ford. And likewise, John D. Rockefeller, Rockefeller Center with the tree, Rockefeller University, yet the basis of the wealth of that family is by destroying opposition, and Ida Tarbell has written about that. Perhaps, though, to move on quickly, why does the Board of Education still celebrate Columbus Day? If there is so much opposition to Columbus, perhaps that day should go back to the school system and it should be a day of studying history. Maybe we can persuade teachers and students to read Gotham by Michael Wallace, excellent book about the history of New York and very open about both the bad and the good of the city. And should we, you know, with our current president and his behavior, should we look at whether the New York City Police Department should be expending the funds to protect him in a manner that costs us as taxpayers, and should we lay that on to the federal government, for he is a federal government employee? So therefore, perhaps beyond what you're doing, you could be more inclusive and include lots of other uses of people's names on buildings which are not perhaps monuments, but perhaps we should take a look at whether we should just simply number our schools and be done with all the names on them. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey Kressler.
Thank you. My name is Jeffrey Kressler. I'm a librarian at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I received my doctorate in American Urban History from the CUNY Graduate School, where I studied with Arthur Schlesinger in the late 80s when he was writing The Disuniting of America. I recommend that short work to this committee. He was among the first to recognize the cancer of identity politics and its negative impact on our body politic. In the mid-90s, I was one of the leading opponents of the Queen Catherine of Braganza statue, a plan pushed forward by the Portuguese-American community and supported by Borough President Schulman and the entire Queens political establishment. No one asked the historians. The idea was that since Queens was named for Queen Catherine, we should have a statue. She was the wife of Charles II of England. The only problem was there was absolutely no evidence that Queens was named for Queen Catherine. None, zero, nada. So if she was not the namesake of the borough, why were we erecting the statue? It was very far along. I argued that it represented the wrong values. First, she was the Royal House of Portugal and the Royal House of England, both of which profited mightily from the African slave trade. Secondly, there was the minor incident known as the American Revolution, where we rejected monarchy and the English monarchy in particular. So I had many problems with the notion of erecting Queen Catherine of Braganza. That said, I categorically rejected her because she had nothing to do with American history, nothing to do with America. At the same time, I categorically reject the idea that any of the statuary or historical monuments or markers in the city of New York should be removed, not one. As a historian, as a New Yorker, as an American, I recoil at the notion of whitewashing history. History is not pretty. History doesn't care how you feel. Baltimore removed the statue of Roger Taney. He was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was the one who wrote the wretched and racist Dred Scott decision, which sent our nation further and faster along the road toward civil war. How will we know about the evil he did in that decision? By removing the statue, we've eliminated this possibility. Someone walking by and saying to his companion, "Hey, do you know who that is?" No, that's Roger Taney. Do you know what he did? Do you know what that son of a bitch did? You kind of miss the opportunity to say that because his statue isn't there. Roger Taney doesn't exist. Roger Taney never existed. That, by the way, is a reference to George Orwell's 1984, wherein the party governs and rules according to this principle. Who controls the past controls the present. Who controls the present controls the future. So I urge you against whitewashing the past because it will result in a kind of monolithic thinking and a diminishing of the complexity of American history, and we need to remind ourselves of who we were even when we were wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. The next panel, next three, is Robert Bishop, Virginia Caputo, and Gerard Matacata. He used to be a real historian. Okay, we're going to start with Robert Bishop. I think you just turned it off.
Good morning.
There we go. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. Thank you for your patience and your persistence. It's good to see a good delegation from the Commission here. My name is Robert Bishop. I live in Little Neck. I am a native of Queens. And generally, my testimony is formatted based on your questionnaire. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll submit it. I want to go sort of to the meat of what I'm doing. Incidentally, Commissioner, your website on the monuments, I checked, 11362. We don't have any monuments. We probably have some room for them. I think the closest thing we have is a little marker in Alley Pond Park. My comments relate to all of the existing and proposed monuments, and it's my suggestion that the presumption should be to preserve monuments unless there's a virtually universal agreement from the body politic to remove a specific monument. Controversy provides interest. Interest provides educational opportunity. Education leads to understanding. Removing a monument tends to erase memory. Removal may effectively remove a symptom, but it fails to provide an educational path to understanding. The prior speaker referenced the dystopian novels. There's 1984, Fahrenheit 451, several others. They're replete with description of cultures built around erasing and rewriting history. The results usually involve a failed effort to create an entirely homogenized society without tolerance of divergent opinion, and that's just not the New York City story. The infrastructure of the solution is in place. As I mentioned, the Parks Department maintains a website at parks.org/art.map, which maps and describes most of all, if not all, of the public monuments in New York City. With relatively small improvements, the site can be really made user-friendly. You know, you can't do that site from your phone. And you could do an app. If you combine it with the technology that you see in the Talking Statues pilot project, where you basically can walk up to a monument, scan a QR code, and it starts talking to you, you've really got the start of something. You can link all of the educational information, all sides of any controversy, to those types of sites. You can do far more than being limited to a bronze plaque. A bronze plaque is like trying to get it all into a Twitter comment, even though they've doubled the letters. In closing, I urge you to use this opportunity that's afforded to you as members of the Commission to continue the dialogue. Your time in the spotlight on this issue presents an opportunity to unite people through an educational process, and I really hope you seize the moment. Thank you.
Perfect. Virginia Caputo.
Thanks. I'm a resident of Queens lifelong, and I'd just like to make a brief point about statues and monuments and the value of art and its reflections on history. This beautiful city has a rich history of art and cultural pieces. Beauty abounds through art, statues, and architecture throughout each borough, on the streets, boroughs, and buildings. Tourists and citizens can see this beauty every day. We should not live in a vacuum and judge the past by our values and standards of today. We are a tolerant and progressive city. Humanity has a long and complicated struggle to achieve where we are today. When I watch a historical show, I can reflect on the past. Hey, I watch old movies, even recent ones, and marvel at the transformation of roles of women today. This assault on statues is starting to look like McCarthyism in the 1950s. Look it up, kids. During the Cultural Revolution in China, Mao destroyed and tried to erase China's past for the new communist world. In April of 2015, ISIS destroyed a 2,000-year-old statues and shrines in Hatra, an Iraq city, on its war on culture because it didn't conform to their very narrow interpretations of Islam. The civic virtue statue, triumphant over righteousness, that stood outside was moved to a cemetery. This represented a classic male civic virtue standing over the female representations of vice and corruption. No little girl can currently ask, what does that mean? And Queens residents are robbed of a beautiful classical piece of art. Rome, the ultimate Catholic city, I'm sorry. Could take down the Colosseum, a symbol of hate where so many early Christians were brutally treated. America, New York City, is who we are today because of that long road. Don't erase that. Christopher Columbus was a daring explorer who lived in the Renaissance of the Middle Ages and lived on those standards of that time. We all have stories. As a descendant of Italian immigrants, I have heard how my ancestors were mistreated and had to climb mountains to achieve the American dream. New stories are being written today by current immigrants. We do not know how the pendulum will swing in the future and how our actions of today will be perceived. Do not set a dangerous precedent.
Thank you. Gerard?
Hello?
Matakata, yes.
My name is Jerry Matakata. I've been involved in education for the last 50 years. I was a teacher in the New York City Board of Education as a history teacher. Right now, I teach at Queensborough Community College, the History Seminar Series, which I started in 2000 and to national accolades and local accolades. When I first heard about this committee, I was very, very angry because of the things that I've heard here today, McCarthyism, 1984. But right now, I'm not as angry anymore. When I wrote this last night, my anger dissipated because the committee, and that's because of the study of history, this committee is made up of only 1 or 2 historians and is not qualified to make value judgments on historical correctness. Not qualified. But its findings will be meaningless anyhow. Meaningless. Because there have been groups like this throughout history that have formed. The ancient Egyptians, the new pharaohs that came in, took off the names of the old pharaohs. Rome tried to erase Carthage and the name of Hannibal. Last week, 2 new books came out about General Hannibal. The Visigoths destroyed Rome. Rome still lives. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin destroyed all previous history, destroyed statues, churches. The most visited site in Russia today is where the Soviets killed the Tsar. The most visited site in Russia today. In the 1930s, the Nazis burned books. Those books are read today. In 2001, the Taliban destroyed the statue of Buddha. That Buddha still lives. In 1967, Mao tried to destroy Chinese history and culture in the Cultural Revolution. Today, the very government that is there is trying to rebuild that history. A terrible government, similar to some of the people on this panel. A government that tells people what is right and what is wrong. The bottom line is the people decide what is right, what is wrong. This is a country built on freedom and democracy, not bureaucrats telling us what is correct and what is not correct. An intelligent and knowledgeable person knows that taking down statues or changing history textbooks, taking down street names or banning free speech will not alter history in the future. It won't. I just went over that. All historical personages are flawed because they are human. They reflect the era in which they live. This is why historians have different opinions on historical events and people in history. Instead of taking down these monuments, let's put up, I agree with Bob on these apps. Let's put up a history app on each of the monuments, letting people that go by those monuments see what they are. But those apps should be very, very put together correctly with different opinions on Columbus. I heard one opinion here from a gentleman. That's his opinion. and he's entitled to that. We live in the United States of America. I have a different opinion on Columbus, and I'm entitled to that. And everyone in this room has an entitlement to their own opinion, not to be told by bureaucrats what's correct, what is right, what is wrong. That's why we fought in 1776. That's why we had a civil war. That's why we have a country that is the greatest country on this earth. And with all due respects, I respect who you are, but I do not respect the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The next panel, next group, will be Jennifer Hadlock. Is that Favo Salam? What's that? And William Krieger. Or Kriegler. Okay, that's it? Okay. Is there somebody? I'm sorry. So you're Jennifer and?
I'm William.
William? And this is? Oh, Fuad? Fuad Salam? Okay. Fuad Salam is here, yes? No, no, okay. There we go. All right. Okay. Jennifer, you're up first.
Hello. Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Hadlock. I am thankful to have a chance to speak today. I am a genealogist, and I help people know the true story of their ancestors and family. The process of this can be very healing. I believe that the United States as a country needs to undo our history, relearn, and heal. And one step in this process is to be truthful about our history. Christopher Columbus was only revered after the Revolutionary War because the folks who fought in that war, including my ancestors, wanted to separate from the British and have a different story of our founding. He never even stepped foot on the mainland that is now called the United States. He tortured and enslaved indigenous people, and being anti-Columbus is not being anti-Italian. We need to relearn this history. J. Marion Sims, a statue in Central Park, honors a man who experimented on enslaved black women to supposedly learn medicine. This statue also needs to be removed. New York City claims to be progressive and often judges the South, but how are we really different? The current statues have whitewashed our history and celebrated racism. Each monument should be judged by who it is that we want to celebrate. What if all of the statues were of mothers, not of war heroes and murderers? It's time. You have a big opportunity to make progress. Please don't squander it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to welcome a group from John F. Kennedy High School, and the next will be Mr. Salam, and then we'll get to William Krieger. If you would read your statement. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Fuad, and I believe that the statues in question should stay because the people they represent are long gone, but they did things that we should not soon forget. I can read about them in history or books and watch a movie about Columbus, but seeing the person standing where I'm really brings history to life. As people, we all make mistakes. But if we refuse to learn from them, we just make them again. So I want to learn from their mistakes. However, I believe that we should add a box with informational flyers near the statues so that people walking by can take the flyer and read about the statue's history, the history of the person, and all about the time that they lived in. Thank you for taking the time to hear my opinion.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salam. Okay, William Krieger is next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have two statements.
I released them in August, but they're apropos for today. One to deal with the Columbus statue, and the other one to virtual civic virtual that you mentioned. The City Council Speaker joined several others in the proposed removal of the towering statue at Columbus Circle honoring Christopher Columbus, a gift from the Italian people to recognize Columbus' enormous achievement in opening up the Americas to the entire world. Yet, the Council Speaker would rather focus on certain particulars in Columbus' life as justification to remove the statue honoring him. She has clearly made it known that she's not only doing it for the Caribbean people, but especially for the Puerto Rican people for which she is one. This is the same woman that supported and defended the honoring of convicted racist terrorist Lopez Rivera at the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City. When does this knee-jerk reaction applying 21st century values to the issue several hundreds of years old end? Do we take down the Washington and Jefferson statues and monuments? They were both slave owners, and Jefferson was even having sex with his slaves. How about more recently, Franklin Delano Roosevelt? He interned the whole population of Japanese Americans just for being that. Now we have the MTA that wants to remove the X symbol from Times Square so as not to offend anyone that it might be symbolizing the Confederate flag. It was clearly designed to show the crosswords of the world, Times Square. I was just wondering if people complained that the X might refer to Malcolm X and some of his controversial topics. Would that be removed then? I gather not. It's time to stop attempting to erase history and learn from it. These nonsense reactions from self-serving elected officials and others will fuel the heated emotional climate and widen the divide amongst people instead of bringing them together. For civic virtue, I made the other comment. Once again, the public officials unveiled a newly restored fountain at Queensborough Hall in honor of women of Queens. What once stood there was the fountain was civic virtue. Its sculptor designed it as a triumph over unrighteousness. The statue was revealed at City Hall in 1922 at a cost of $60,000 back then. That's buku dollars. It depicted a strapping nude male personifying civic virtue, triumphing over two sirens of vice and corruption. While people had a different interpretation of the artwork back then. It was later moved to Queensborough Hall in 1941 and remained there unkept, unmaintained, and corroded until for 71 years. Then in 2012, the city decided to secretly move the statue from public view to a private property in Brooklyn, a cemetery, as it was noted. What should bother most people is the lack of public forum in its removal. We are at a time in our history where certain individuals or groups of people believe they have the right to reinterpret an artist's meaning in his work and therefore apply 21st century attitudes to the early meaning at that time. I recall not too long ago when city funds were used to present an artwork depicting a crucifix in a jar of urine. Back then, the radical liberals defended the artwork and chastised the critics for imposing their narrow-minded viewpoint on an artist's own interpretation. How far have we come from that point? The righteous place for civic virtues is back at City Hall to remind all the elected officials, particularly this current administration, that we cannot run a Tammany Hall or act like a boss tweed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the next is Phil Orenstein, Steve Lillendy, and Trashal Pace. Okay, Phil, you're up. Are you Phil? Yes, you're up.
Yeah, I press this. Yeah, I guess so. Good morning, if it's still morning. My name is Phil Orenstein. I am a Queens resident, the president of America's oldest Republican club, the Queens Village Republican Club. And yes, we Republicans are alive well here in Queens and New York City. We're composed of people from all races, cultures, and religions, and we unite on the basis of our love of our country and our Constitution, and this forms the basis of why we object to tearing down our historical statues of historical figures in our history and the history of Western civilization. The reason why we value this is because we love our freedoms, we love our liberties, we love our democracy, we love our country, and I speak on behalf of many people who feel it's wrong to judge whether or not, I mean, we could judge, but to tear down our statues is just plain wrong. I believe that some statues are considered symbols of hate because of the past of owning slaves or being colonizers or whatever that these figures did in their past that was wrong. I believe it may be wrong according to today's statues. Such great American figures as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, of course, Christopher Columbus. There are five statues dedicated to his memory here in New York City. I believe Benjamin Franklin, Teddy Roosevelt, and others may be on the chopping block. My question to you is this a precedent? If these statues are considered for removal, is the next step to remove their names from our history books? Is the next step to remove them from our textbooks, our social studies curriculum, in our schools and our colleges? That's a question I have for this panel. Also, I'd like to bring up another consideration, real quick, if I may. Another symbol of hate, which seems to be missed in all this discussion, is the very Democratic Party itself, which, according to history, the Democratic Party championed slavery, supported slavery, and opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The KKK was the terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. If we are considering historical figures, markers, and monuments, why not consider the legacy and history and the leaders of the Democrat Party as well? Thank you for allowing me to make my statement.
Thank you. Okay, what's that? Okay, so, okay, we have, I'm sorry, can we have Joseph, what's the last name? Gagliardo could join, I'm sorry. And then, are you Mr. Pace?
Yes.
Okay, you're up next.
Hello, my name is Shayshawn Shaquem Pace. I believe that the statues of people who hurt others to become famous should be removed because of the crimes that they committed. Columbus helped to kill a lot of people, a lot of Native Americans, just to take their lands and people. Like Dr. J. Sims hurt slave women just to learn more about their human bodies. No one should ever have to suffer to make another person so famous that they can't, damn. So,
keep going.
That's right. Take your time.
So famous that they get to be remembered forever. I say remove all the statues and replace them with leaders from our area who did get great things and did not have to hurt anyone to do them. That would be a person that I would be proud to look up to when I am walking in the park. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to hear my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
Joseph, you're up next, yes. Go ahead, yep.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for having me to the commission. I'm humbled to be among some great speakers today. I would appreciate if people would stop telling me what I, as an Italian American, am offended by. It's just something that inflames the process, and maybe we should avoid doing that, because I know I can't tell anybody what inflames them. I represent the Conference of Presidents of Major Italian American Organizations. It's an organization representing Italian Americans throughout the United States, and it's the larger organizations, and I'm privileged to be here. I can't repeat everything that was said. I can only say that my own personal experience was I was raised by my grandmother in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and for 16 years she raised me and never mentioned that Christopher Columbus was great. She said that he was a voyager. She said that he thought beyond his own limitations. She said that he traveled beyond his own limitations, but she never said that he was a great. And if you open up today's paper, we'll see that people that we think are great in Washington are kind of falling by the wayside. So maybe she was way bit ahead of her time for a 6th grade graduate. I want to just ask the commission to consider 3 things when they consider these statues. One is the time period that a person did something to be recognized for their achievement. So in the case of Christopher Columbus, what did he do? When did he do it? Was it legal? Was it ethical? Was it moral? And did it benefit society? And in Christopher Columbus' case, who did he do it for? Did he do it for America, or did he do it for another country? I would ask that you consider that. The second thing is, when was it that he was immortalized? When was it that America, and before him, King George immortalized him by chartering Columbia University? When was it that the person that's being immortalized was immortalized, and why? Christopher Columbus, we know, began to be immortalized during the period that Italians were being asked to come to this country to find a better way of life. And third, and this is very important, is why are we now being asked to remove it? So I would recommend strongly that we don't start taking down statues, but we start adding to the history. We start looking at indigenous people. We start looking at blacks, Hispanics, and people that have made a difference. Bring them to the litmus test. Let's go forward. What you're taking away is part of my bringing up. I brought my children up the same way. I'm listening to put kiosks up and put labels up. My 13-year-old kids, when I brought them to Columbus Circle, they Googled it before I finished telling them my story about my grandmother. Every kiosk is in every 13-year-old kid's hand. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Kenny DeJesus, Eliad Gonzalez, and I'm sorry.
Good one.
What's that? It looks like Guido Josephat.
Is this thing on? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. You can proceed.
Hello, my name is Kenny DeJesus, and I believe that the statues should stay because they teach us about our history. If we cannot change the past, we should not change the statues. However, I believe that we should develop education programs to teach students like me about the good and bad things that have happened in our past. So together we are always learn about ways not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Thank you for taking the time to hear my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. DeJesus.
You're welcome.
Mr. Gonzalez is next.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eliud Gonzalez, and I believe that some statues should stay, like Columbus, because they did things that would have happened in history with or without them. But I also believe that the statues like Dr. James J. Sims in Brooklyn should be removed because they personally committed crimes to become famous. However, I believe that none of the statues should be destroyed because they are all part of our past. That is why I would recommend that all the statues be moved into museums after they are removed. This way, when I go to the museum, I can have someone to teach me about the good and bad things that the person may have done in better space than a public space outside. Thank you for your time and to hear my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Josephat? Yes.
Hello. Hello. My name is Giyo Josephat, and I believe the statue should stay because they represent paragraph in some way. Colombia was one of the first to Europeans to discover. American and people from Italy look up to him. However, I believe that we should add plaques to the statue to teach students like me about person. The statue represents this way. When I walk past it, I can read and learn more about the man or woman who is standing in stone of with me. Thank you for taking time of hear my opinion.
Thank you very much. We have two more panels. The next will be Glenn, is it Concave? Yes. Theo Chino and Surf Maltese.
Oh, good.
Is Mr. Maltese here?
You can go first.
You're on this panel, yes. Greetings. Okay, Glenn, you are next.
Okay. All right, so hi, my name is Glenn Contav, and I'm the founder and CEO of Movers and Shakers. We execute direct action and advocacy campaigns for marginalized communities using virtual reality, augmented reality, and the creative arts. I'm here to speak today because the bottom line is, in terms of what statues stand for, it's bigger than just the monument itself. If you think of the erasure of history, it doesn't make a difference in terms of whether a statue stands or it doesn't. Everyone knows who Adolf Hitler is, whether or not there's a statue of him. And I'm coming to say that if you look at the definition of terrorism, the idea of terrorism is that it's someone who's coming to instill fear in civilians for a political purpose. If you look at the case of Christopher Columbus, the purpose was profit. Came in, 1492, by 1515, 80% of the original population was dead. And he said in his diary himself that young women were in high demand, 9 and 10 years old. Does New York City stand for pedophilia? Does New York City stand for terrorism? Doesn't really make sense. But at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Nazi sympathizers immediately. Henri Philippe Pétain, he's immediately gone. And so what this says to me is that as a black man, my life does not matter. My last name is Contav. It's a slave owner's last name. I don't know my real last name as a result of Columbus because, number one, Haitian. He came and took over Hispaniola. Number two, the reason why most black people are in this country is a result of the slave trade because, you know, the indigenous people, a lot of them died, and they're like, well, okay, we need to make money. Let's bring in some black people. So now we're here. So why is there a statue that glorifies that? Why is the erasure of black and brown history a reoccurring theme? Don't you think that if people understood with a layered context in terms of the true history, that maybe immigration policy would be more sympathetic? Isn't this a sanctuary city? Wouldn't it make sense that maybe people would care when a black man is killed if we're not brutalized by whatever? I digress. I just want to make a statement here. Our group Movers and Shakers, we're going to host a slave auction tomorrow at 1 p.m. at Union Square, and it's also an augmented reality art exhibit that reveals the true story of Columbus. It's protesting white supremacy as a whole, and it's also protesting the erasure of Black and brown history, because we need layered context. We need to understand that it's an objective fact that Christopher Columbus was a terrorist, and it shouldn't stand, period. Thank you.
Thank you. Theo Chino is next.
Yeah, hello. My name is Theo Chino. I'm a Manhattan resident. I was born in France from a Dominican mother who was born herself on the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I was born from a Japanese-American grandfather, and my father was an American-Japanese descendant who himself grew up in France. My education came from France and from the Dominican Republic, and Columbus is the marker from the Dark Age to the Enlightenment movement. Columbus came back. Columbus is that marker that made the world change, or who made the world change at that moment, from one side to the other, to the side where we ask questions. So the fact that this panel is here today is the first part of asking the question of what our monuments stand for. And sometimes we don't need to take everything apart to make a statement. And my simple recommendation as a New Yorker is that the statue of Columbus stays, but the street around it change its name to the Taino Circle. So the Columbus statue would be in the Taino Circle, and the Columbus Avenue would become the Taino Avenue. Simple change like that can remind people why historical things change, and as we discover that people were not what they seem to be put back in the context of today. So with the virtual reality, with other things, we can educate our young. So my request is very simple, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Serfin Maltese.
Hi, I'm very glad to be here, although I'm not as glad that we have this occasion.
I think, yes, you have to press. There we go. Thank you.
I'm Serfin Maltese. I was a state senator in Queens for 20 years. I am the chairman of the board of Christ the King High School and a co-founder, together with Commendatore Ann Paolucci of Queens, of the Christopher Columbus Association. I find I need my glasses after all. As a preliminary, I have to say, just in the short time that I've been here, and of course, listening, as every good citizen is doing right now, to what's been transpiring, it does seem that every grievance, every complaint, every recrimination is being heaped on not only Columbus, but others. As an Italian-American who is co-founder of the Christopher Columbus Association and a Cavaliere knighted by the Italian government, I am directing my comments to Christopher Columbus, but I certainly feel that we do not want to emulate the book burners. We do not want to emulate the iconoclasts who have destroyed such an important part of our history, not only here, but in Europe and in Asia. So at any rate, I join with my dear friend Ann Paolucci, objecting to those politicians and Columbus detractors bent on rewriting history according to their predilections, undermining the process. Columbus, Italians, Italian-Americans, and the Christian tradition that Columbus represented. The great historians of Harvard and Johns Hopkins, starting with Justin Windsor, Herbert Baxter Adams, and the many qualified Age of Discovery scholars, since then Samuel Eliot Morison, Fred Schiappelli, etc., even the most famous navigators of the time, the Portuguese, would not go where Christopher Columbus went 4 times, but in doing so, brought to the full flowering the Renaissance spirit of expansion and discovery.
To those who cite his so-called cruelty, as I heard earlier today, I point out, according to eminent historians, that Columbus, in fact, was replaced as administrator in Hispaniola, the first New World colony, because he was, quote, too mild and compassionate. I strongly urge that all of us take a more historical perspective on the matter of Columbus and stop asserting our individual political, religious, and racial opinions to make gross and untenable points that disparage and denigrate not only Columbus, but his heritage, nationality, religion, and all those who honor and venerate him and his historic accomplishments. I do want to say, with due deference to this distinguished panel, you are there partially to serve as a buffer for the chief executive of New York City, and I caution him, I counsel him that if you succeed in the purpose that many people are urging you, a road that they're urging you to take, that our present mayor will go down in history as the one who killed Christopher Columbus.
Okay, so hold on. Nadia, are you saying there's one more panel? Okay, let me call up, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Constance Delvecchio, Roger Drew, and Xenia Diente. And then there's one more after that, yes? Okay, so there's two more. Okay.
I'm up here all by my lonesome.
Do we have Roger Drew and Xenia Diente here? Or if they? Okay. Maybe those folks have departed. Oh, what's that? No? Okay. Xenia's off. Okay. Roger Drew is here or not? No? Okay, so let me then ask these two. Well, what about this?
Yeah, also, but in this
Okay, why don't we, okay. Josie Hudson and Sammy Rufaid. And then we're going to have J.C. Hallman, then we'll be finished. Constance, why don't you proceed?
Okay, that's good. I'm Constance Delvecchio Maltese. As you heard, my husband was just before me. It goes to show you women's rights don't prevail over there, not in our house at any rate. I was the former Queen's Council on the Arts president. I was dubbed Age of Discovery artist by Ann Paolucci of the Columbus Countdown. It was 1988 when she asked me to do the series of portraits. I'm an artist, as I said. Do a portrait of Columbus, she said. Nobody knew what he looked like. At that time, I was studying at the Art Students League. I spoke to my instructor and I said, I've just been commissioned to do Christopher Columbus, but nobody knows what he looks like. She said, it's easy. Go out, find a good-looking young Italian guy and have him sit for you. So that's what I did. I decided, since there was no internet information at the time, that was 1988, I had to go to different libraries to get all my information. All I knew about Columbus was from school. In 1492, he sailed the ocean blue. They didn't teach you much more than that. Probably still don't. When I started reading about the man, I realized here's an extraordinary thing happening. He was an ordinary man doing extraordinary things. He was a young visionary whose main desire was to explore. He knew that wasn't going to get him the money that he needed, so he offered something better. Anybody that will give me enough money to sail the ocean blue, I will be able to bring back gold. He thought he was going to India, as you probably all know. I'm not going to give you a history lesson. He was going to go where Vasco da Gama went, but he was going to go in the opposite direction because the map makers at that time said that the world was not flat, it was round. If you go the other way, you'll still get there. He followed their advice. He went out with no more knowledge with navigational instruments, then a half-hour hourglass that had to be turned every half hour in order to keep time. With birds that would give him information when he was close to land, and in a ship that some of the houses in the Hamptons are bigger than. And he went out with these other two ships. As you well know, he got it from Queen Isabella. After the whole thing was over, he didn't find the gold, as you all know. But he was not interested in that. I guess that bell is for me. Let me go on quickly. I had an Age of Exploration exhibit at the Sierra Space Museum for 3 years, where the Intrepid ship is in the New York Harbor. There were 3, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria replicas outside. Children from school made trips into the ship, and I gave lectures because each one of these portraits that I did 13, had a legend around their particular portrait that told about the man. And of course, the kids, especially the 12-year-olds, they were taking this in school. He was not the first one here. There were others here before him. My answer to them, he was the first immigrant. He made 4 trips to and fro, the old world to the new world and back again. And by so doing, he was bringing the culture of the new world into the old world, from the old world into the new world, and there was a melting of the two. Did things happen that shouldn't? Of course. A lot of the people that he had on his ships weren't the cream of the crop, don't forget. Some of them were probably even Shanghai. They were not the nicest of people. But he, on his own papers, on the top, wrote Expo Ferens, half Greek, half Latin, and it meant Christ-bearer. He was a religious man, and as my husband pointed out, a mild-mannered man with compassion. And after he was brought back in chains in 1502, after his 4th voyage, he insisted on keeping the chains and went before Queen Isabella and told her, after all I've done for you, this is what you do for me. He was replaced by all those that followed him. They too.
I'm sorry, we're out of
time.
Sorry.
Okay. As you can see, I'm pretty emotional about it. I spent 4 years on doing these portraits. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And this will be the final panel. We have Roger Drew, Sammy Rufail, and Stephen Lacardi. Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, you didn't sign up. We're taking Roger Drew off? Duly noted. Sammy Rufail and Stephen Lacardi. And you are?
I'm a social worker.
I'm sorry, which name are you?
Oh, Lacardi, Stephen Lacardi.
Lacardi, okay. Is Sammy Rufail here? If not, you'll be the final. Oh, you are? Okay, good. You're the final 2. Thank you very much. And go ahead. You're up.
So I'm a social worker here working in Queens, and I'm also an artist, visual artist, and a spoken word poet. The one thing I want to say is thank you all for staying here. This is a very important topic, and thank you all to the mayor and for organizing this panel. I also want to say, just listening from all the things that people have said so far, I think there's a third way, and there's a lot of different options, and I don't think there's one sort of salve for everything. I just want to read some of the responses that I had to the survey that you guys had online, and I'll make my comments brief. By virtue of being public, by virtue of being public spaces, the public has a certain right to these spaces. If the monument exists as a symbol that reinforces ideas, beliefs, or actions that promote violence, both covert and overt, towards individuals or collectives, such monuments are not fit to be displayed publicly. This undertaking involves creating a new precedent that recognizes that what is erected now or in the past is subject to the scrutiny and reckoning of posterity. Erasing history is immeasurably dangerous. This is a delicate undertaking. We should not fret over how we treat monuments now will impact the future. Instead, we should consider the kind of future we want and how preserving, altering, or modifying these monuments will achieve that future. If we want a future that is inclusive, empathic, respectful, equitable, and just, then let us consider the necessary modifications, alterations, and preservations to achieve that future. There is no universal salve. Outfitting monuments with QR code technology, as has been mentioned, for example, that links individuals to an internet database with 3D scans of the previous or current monuments, such as been undertaken by the Project Mosul that you can find at projectmosul.org. These could provide necessary and complete context. These objects are out in the public, and I think by and large, people don't have access to the complexity of their history. This leaves the fate of the physical objects, whether what we choose to do with them, sort of ambiguous. If we choose to erect public projects that replace existing monuments, we can use funds raised from this, the private selling of the current monuments to fund those projects. So there are many different options, as we've talked about. I think technology is going to play a really big part. And again, I just want to thank everybody for being here and for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is J.C. Hallman. I'm the author of a piece in Harper's this month about the J. Marion Sims statue. And Sims only got mentioned a couple times today, which I think is notable because it was the August 19th protest at the Sims monument that really got all of this started, this connection of the what happened in Charlottesville to New York City. And that was a result of 10 years of protest by activists who were objecting to the Sims statue, and the women in particular who refused to take no for an answer and who refused to take context for an answer, the idea being that the Parks was saying you can put up a plaque or a historical marker, and they said no, no, it has to be removed, and I agree with them. Specifically about the Sims monument, the Sims history is really complex, and one of the things that I think needs to be said is that when we're considering monuments, we need to be allocating more resources to investigating those histories. We tend to pawn that kind of work off onto interns and stuff rather than valuing it for what it is. And I think we live in an age when truth and history and fact and news are being reevaluated and thought anew. And the monument issue is a symbol of that, and I think the Sims monument in particular is a case study in how that can go wrong, how a statue that was erected when there was no public commentary can result in a false history being enshrined. I think when you look at the Sims history, as I did, you realize that he was criticized for being reckless and lethal by his contemporaries. And I've found evidence that suggests that Sims was more or less acting as an informal agent of the Confederacy during the war. That's not in my piece, but I'd be happy to supply it to the Commission if they're interested in that. I think I agree that everything about all this is all about truth and history, as some people have said, but monuments themselves are not history unto themselves. As was said when the Sims monument was erected, one doctor said that a monument represents the values of the figure memorialized so that those values can be emulated. Not so that you can walk down the street and learn history. That's what we have history books for. They're not the same thing. A monument is a public commentary about the values of the person memorialized. And in those cases, when a history turns out to be false or when those values are revealed to be abhorrent, those statues should come down. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that this is concluding. Are we saying that we're going to give anybody a final chance? If there's anybody who has not, I think we're wrapping it up. But I just wanted to say that this is the first of 5 of these. I'm going to be absolutely 100% at all of them, listening to everybody. We're going to have a different variety of commissioners, some new faces you'll see at the next one, but I really want to thank everybody. And I will depart from tradition to give a hand to the folks from Kennedy High School. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm thrilled to have been here today. I'm really grateful for everybody who took the time out of their day to come here and testify. Thank you so much. So concludes our first public meeting. Thank you.